You're listening to Catholic Family Podcast, Episode 27.
I'm Kevin Davis. Thanks so much for listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. And today I'm happy to be joined yet again by my parents, Dan and Lisa Davis. And we're going to talk about a topic today that is very near and dear to many hearts, I believe, and many young families, old families, people with kids in general, and I think even people without kids, because it's the topic of how parents should treat their kids or allow their kids to act in church. Now, before we get into this topic, I want to say a few things. First of all, we are not priests. We are not experts. This is purely our opinions. This is, especially from my parents, I'm going to hopefully let them do most of the talking. It's also just their opinions. They've got experience from it, that they've learned from it. They've spent 30 years raising kids, and so this is their views on it. But it is still just their opinion. It's my opinion. We are not authorities. We're not trying to insult anyone. We're not trying to attack anyone. We're not trying to make someone who has kids in church feel bad. That is absolutely not what we're trying to do here. We're just trying to give the approach that worked for my parents and our views on the matter in general. And when we get into this topic, I want to start out by saying how important it is for me. This is one of my, I don't know if favorite topics is the word, but one of the most important topics I think that we can talk about as Catholics, because we parishioners have a great responsibility. And of course, it starts with each of us in that we have to get as much grace as we can. We have to try to get to heaven. We have to get our kids to heaven. That's the first goal. But the second goal should be to be the best example and the best shining light we can to everyone else around us. We have to be the people that everyone wants to look to and look at and say, that is what that is how people should behave and act in church. Because if we don't do it, who will? I mean, everyone has to pull their own part. We can't wait for the priest to come to us and say, this is what you need to do. You need to wear longer skirts, or you need to genuflect fully, or you need to dress nicely every Sunday, or you need to take your kids out when they're screaming. This is our responsibility. Now, yes, of course, the priest ultimately is the superior of his chapel. He's the one who calls it. But the priest has so many different things he has to care for, and he has so many politics and whatnot that he doesn't want to upset people. And there's a lot that goes on there. And so as people, it's our responsibility to do the best that we possibly can, not just for us, not just for our kids, but for every person who walks into that church. Think every Sunday that someone's walking in off that street and they just might have the grace that one day they have the grace to walk into that church and possibly be converted to traditional Catholicism. And we are part of that, what they see in that church. We are part of what they experience. Maybe that one time they are given that grace to walk into that church. And that's what we should always have in our minds. That, of course, first of all, we are there to honor God, for goodness sake. That's the first point. We're there. This isn't just something we do every Sunday. God is there. That is God's house. If we go into the Queen's house, if we go into the president's house, even if it's someone you don't like Biden, you're still going to go in there and you're going to treat it respectfully and you're going to act the best that you possibly can. And for goodness sake, let's remember that we're in God's house and we must dress as well as we possibly can and act the best we possibly can. And also for the neighbor who might be walking in and needs to see. Because remember that the people walking in off the street, they don't necessarily know what the Mass is about or know the depth. They are just going to judge it off of what they see and hear and can sense. And so that's what I want to start the show off with, and to keep that in mind while we're talking about this, that it is our opinion, but let's remember how important it is how we come off in the church. First of all, to please God, of course, but then also to make sure that we are a good influence on our neighbor and our fellow parishioners. So, Mom and Dad, thanks so much for being patient with me for that. And thanks for joining the show.
Yep, thanks for having us, Kevin. Hey, Kevin, you'd think we raised you or something.
Yeah, I know. I mean, I think that I've had plenty of, yeah. Show.
I don't think I have anything to add.
No, thanks for joining the show, guys. But I mean, it's so important. I've had these conversations before, and I think that it's so easy to get into this idea of, well, let's just judge everyone's hearts and everyone's doing their best. And yeah, that's also true. We don't want to go in and judge people and start slandering people and giving people bad looks, but start with yourself. You should be absolutely the best you possibly can be. And if you are, I guarantee you everyone else around you will be better.
True.
Yeah, and I'll start with a real quick little story here, Kevin, and just seeing things on a good side. When we first started going to Omaha, we first brought you to Omaha. I don't know if you remember, but the dress code in the church was bad. You saw teenagers with jeans and sneakers and long hair and I mean, just in general, the state of just doing things respectfully was not there in Omaha, but
they were learning.
But they were learning little by little. I think the bishop, through his example, he never was preachy about things. He may have put a little notice out in the vestibule, but he never harangued his parishioners. But just little by little by little, through his good example, his good preaching, and everything else. Now today you go and really Omaha as a parish, as a chapel is everything you would hope it would be.
Yeah, it truly is. I think one of the things that's important to start this whole conversation off with, though, is that nobody is born a Major League Baseball player. No family, no kid is born knowing how to behave. I mean, it's our job as parents to train our children and to train ourselves how to have proper behavior. And it's got to be important to us. I mean, if I think about Tiger Woods out there being trained to be a golfer when he was 4 or 5 years old. 4 or 5 years old. That was their the important thing in that family. And well, by gum, he did it. We're no, and we can do the same thing with our own kids. It's a lot of what you expect, what your priorities are, and how well you set up your family life, your life, your philosophical life. It goes into how your children are going to behave, not only in mass, but everywhere. And that should be your main goal. You don't want to have a child that everybody cringes when they come over to your house. Now, there are kids who are going to be ringers no matter what you do. I mean, that's the way it is. And we talked about the temperaments. There are some that are going to be harder to train than others. And you're going to have bad days, weeks, months, maybe even years. But that doesn't mean you don't work extra hard to train that child and to and make them toe the line in your family, because that is your priority, because it's as important to you, or more important to you, that they behave well in mass than they behave well in a movie theater or in a restaurant, you know. And it's up to you. It's really, there is no child who cannot be trained. I've had 10, trust me, and there's some who you would have thought would have been impossible. But there are tricks, and we can share some of those with you too.
Yeah, I think it really starts with just making the decision on your own part as a parent. Do I want to take this as a hobby, or do I want to take this as a vocation? Do I want to be a professional? Do I want to be the top of my field as a parent? And you've got to make that commitment in your own heart that I'm going to do what it takes to be the best parent I can possibly be.
And that starts with infants. I mean, that it's not something that you suddenly realize when your 12-year-old is misbehaving. We better crack down now. If you've waited until they're 12 years old, boy, it can be done, but it's really hard. You start when they are babies. You don't have a crying child in the church building, period. You just don't. And that's a good part parent training. But believe it or not, even an infant starts to learn that they don't make noise in the church building. They do start to learn at the youngest age. I mean, you can have a Pavlovian response in the youngest of children. You open a certain cabinet and a 1-year-old knows that's where the goodies are. So, I mean, they do learn at the earliest stages, and you cannot start young enough to train them to behave in mass.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I think that I should say right now that we plan on doing 2 parts to this show. The first part is a little more philosophical, a little more of the overall view of it. And then the second part, we're going to do part 2, will be more of the nuts and bolts and exactly how you guys recommend that you do this. And I think that, as you said, you start with infants. And I think I'm going to actually disagree, but I'm sure you will agree with me when I say that you actually start with yourself. And I think that from my experience, I guess that, and this is totally, and I really mean this is a defect of mine. I do not naturally dress well. I'm sure, Mom, you know this very well. My other brothers and sisters listening to this are nodding their heads and saying, yeah, Kevin dresses like a bum. And it's really, I'm just instinctively, I don't care. I'm the phlegmatic. It's like, okay, yeah, but I really have to fight for that and really say, okay, it has to start with me. And if I don't care, if I'm dressing like I don't care, if I'm not giving my absolute best, as Dad said, as a pro, or as you guys said, as a professional, then how can I be a parent? So absolutely, I'd say before anything else starts, it's got to start with us and how we dress and how we act and how we even reverence God.
Right. And how we treat the Mass as being sacred. And not just when you're at church, but all the time. And when you're getting dressed for church, when the night before Mass, when the kids are brushing their teeth, when at any given time, they need to understand just how special it is, and how going to Jesus's house is a wonderful, awesome, sacred experience.
Right. And you don't just wait till Sunday morning to talk about that. You talk about that through the week. You talk about God. You talk about Our Lady. You it's part of your intrinsic life, and the highlight of your religious week is obviously Sunday morning, especially. Weekday Mass is a wonderful, wonderful thing, but especially, that Sunday morning obligation, it should be the most important part of they should know how important it is to you. I mean, I would say there are very few people that are born pious. You teach piety, and you teach I think an offshoot of piety is reverence, and you must teach reverence. Very, very few people have it naturally. A few people do. I have a story. Little Father Philip, when he was about maybe 2 years old, and we were going to Our Lady of Victory, and we were standing in the vestibule. He was just a little tiny guy, and he was looking through the open doors, and Father came out of the rectory, or the sacristy, and went around. He was, in his cassock and surplice, and genuflected, and little tiny Father Philip goes, "It's God." Well, no, not exactly. And then you have that conversation. But I think that if you treat, even when you're in church, you always whisper, they respond to that extremely well, that they catch it from you, that reverence and piety. Piety is, very few people are born with it. Just like any of the other virtues, you usually have to teach these to your child. You don't just, when they hit confirmation age, make them study the gifts and fruits of the Holy Ghost. You start consciously teaching that when they are little kids. You really have to think about it and consciously teach piety. You teach reverence. You teach patience. You teach, long suffering. And we parents, maybe through our example, teach long suffering the best. But it's not something you expect them to be born with. And
the Mass is a privilege. So
right, yeah.
we always try to make sure to say, hey, we get to go to Mass, not that we have to go to Mass. If you treat it like a burden, the children will grow up and consider Mass a burden. If you look at it as a privilege, then it's a completely different mindset for them.
Right. And then they pick it up from you. Mm-hmm. If you are late to Mass every Sunday, but being late every once in a while happens, it's life. If you are late every Sunday, you are telling your child that it is not a priority. If you are scrambling every Sunday morning and it's chaos at your house getting ready for Mass and you're scrambling, that also teaches them that, it's not a good way to set up reverence, let's say, that you need to do some planning ahead. You need to make sure that, if Mass is at 10 o'clock, for you in your brain, Mass should be at 9:30. Because if Mass in your brain is at 9:30 and you have 10 kids, you're going to get there at 10 o'clock. you know. And every parent knows that. If you're going to get somewhere on time, you start way earlier than you think you should. And that's life. And that's planning. And it's important enough. Mass is more important than anything else you do. Are you on time to the baseball practice? Most people are. Are you on time to a game? Are you on time to the movie theater? Well, yeah. Well, you make arrangements so that you are. Mass is far more important than baseball, far more important than movies. And the children know this, that if you get to every baseball game and every movie on time, but you don't get to Mass on time, this is a very deep lesson you're teaching your child.
And I think that something, I guess, slightly on a different topic, but something that really affected me as a kid growing up was that we would get up very early because we lived pretty far from church. And I remember in the winter days, we had this little oven in the living room, and we'd all lay down in front of it because it blew out this hot air, and many burnt coats, which I'm sure.
Yeah, but they always sit too close and burn.
Yeah, many burnt coats. But what I really remember very distinctly, and I still can hear it almost, is the sound of the King singers singing this sacred music. And we listened to the same CD for it had to have been 10 years. I mean, really, every Sunday morning we listened to this CD, and it really put us, even as kids, it put us in this reverent mindset. I remember it. I can really remember how I felt. Now I was still a kid, but I remember thinking, oh, this is serious. This is heavenly. This is godly. And I think that was a really good, I don't know if that's a trick that you guys had, but that really worked for me. And I remember it to this day. And so we are on our 1 hour drive in now, we always listen to sacred music as well. And even as adults, for me, it's huge to get into that, to help me get into that mindset of we're going to see God.
Right. Yeah. And you set the scene as parents for everything, for learning, for piety, for all of the virtues. It's up to you to set the scene. And, you can have far more influence than you think. I mean, everything you do is teaching. Everything that you don't do is also teaching. So, I mean, you have to keep that in mind. It is a heavy responsibility. Parenthood is a pretty heavy responsibility, and doing everything we can to get our children to heaven. It is your one job, that you have one thing. Once you have kids, you have one thing. And that one thing is to get yourselves and your children to heaven. That's interchangeable. It all goes together, because if you're not saving your own soul, good luck, having any effect on your children's. But I think that you have to remember that as parents, that every moment is a teaching moment. You're setting the scene. You're training these very fertile brains to love God. And then it's all about loving. I mean, and that's a really important thing to remember too, that the more you make it a big, ugly discipline fest, the more you're stressed about everything, they feel that, and you're not going to have as good learning experience. It's much, much better to learn through love and affection than it is to learn by being swatted. So you play your King singers or whatever it is, the Tallis scholars, whatever, in the morning on the way to Mass, and it sets a scene. They don't even know you're doing it. You have beautiful religious imagery in your home, and you put flowers in front of the Blessed Mother, and she's got a beautiful crown in May, and all of these things set a scene. And if you don't have these things in your home, whether you like it or not, you're also teaching them something. You're setting a different scene. So what do you want? What do you want out of your family? It requires, you want to save their souls, and it requires planning and a little bit of extra work. And it's not like it's hard. It's actually, I think, really super duper fun. But it's important, and you cannot take for granted the fact that you really do have to be planning all the time, setting the scene.
And sometimes I would even say acting. Now, acting, that may be the wrong word, but I think that many people, and myself definitely included, have plenty of times where you have dry spells in the faith. And this happened to the saints. The saints tell us all the time, this happens. And this is what makes you a saint, is when you do your best to get through these dry times. This is the time. This is what makes you a saint. And I think that as parents, think of it this way. If priests have bad days, priests have bad mornings. I've seen priests wake up for an early Mass and look like they want to go back to bed. Of course they do. They're human. And so imagine if a priest got up in the pulpit and for his sermon, he's kind of, okay, today is, the second Sunday of, if he's monotone and he looks like he's in a bad mood and he doesn't look like he wants to be there. I mean, how are the people going to take it? Of course, the people are going to take it bad. They're going to take it like, wow, I mean, if he doesn't care, why should I care? And so it's the same, it's a trickle down effect, right? I mean, if he's like that, if we feel like that from him, of course our kids are going to feel like that with us. If we act like, oh, I don't want to get up, or I don't want to be here, or I don't act particularly reverent, as you say, everything we do is a teaching moment.
Right.
The bishop has a little plaque, I think, in the sacristy, and I'm probably not quoting it exactly, but just paraphrasing, and it says something to the effect of treat this mass as if it was your first mass, treat this mass as if it was your last mass. Mm-hmm. And I think that, that's basically the priests, I think, especially look at themselves to a large degree as like NFL football players, and every Sunday, every mass is their Super Bowl. Mm-hmm. And they've got to be absolutely at the top of their game. They can have their life, their health or whatever, having a rough day outside of mass, but in mass, that's your Super Bowl. Right.
You put your best face forward. And it's hard as a parent, because as a parent, it's 24/7, 365, and you're going to have bad days. You're going to, like I said, bad days, bad weeks, bad years, but you do your absolute best to pull yourself up by your bootstraps and just try very hard to remember the big picture and pull yourself back around. I mean, it's don't expect perfection of yourself. Don't expect immediate perfection of your children, but expect that you are always trying. Expect and commit to always trying harder. And if you have a bad day, to drop back 10 and punt, to try again harder the next day. And sometimes we went through periods of time when, gosh, you kids would just, oh my gosh, I didn't think I was going to be able to stand another day of you. And you guys would be so terrible. We'd go through these phases. Oh, my stars.
I remember this really differently. I don't know.
I bet you do. Yeah, wow. And there were times when I just couldn't take you much longer. Well, and then were times, and I read this in a book somewhere, and I don't remember what the book was anymore, that said when you're going through a phase like that, to gather all the children around you and say it. We are really having a hard time, aren't we, kids? And this is not very pleasant around here right now. And I'm not going to blame anybody, and we're just going to start all over again. And when we were homeschooling, there were a couple times we took the day off and went outside and started over the next day, because nobody was accomplishing anything, and we were all just cranky. And sometimes you have to do that.
Yeah, you get in a punishment downward spiral,
right?
That you have to sometimes just decide you're going to break.
You just have to break it. Yeah, you're breaking a cycle, and that goes for everything. If you're finding that your kids are just being terrible in church, or anywhere at home, take them aside, have a family meeting, and just say, and you can even ask their opinions on it. So what do you guys think is the problem? What do you think is causing the problems around here? And what do you think we need to do? And sometimes you get some really good ideas from them, but you need to put the responsibility on their shoulders, because that's where it belongs. It's on yours, but it's also on theirs. I mean, they have free will. The youngest kids have free will. So, I mean, it's got to be a family project, that it's not just mom and dad. It's not just mom and dad's religion. It's it's yours too. It's your children's too. And we all want to love our Lord as much as we possibly can, and do our best out of love for our Lord. And it always has to go back to that point that, I'm not trying to make your life miserable, kids. I'm really not. But if we're going to come out smelling like a rose, if we're going to make our Lord proud of us, then we need to try a little harder, and then they simply have to be pulled up sometimes. There's nothing wrong with correcting your children. You think about how angry our Lord was in the temple with the money changers. You're allowed to be angry sometimes, as long as you don't hurt anybody. But they sometimes need to know you are displeased. Now let's pull up here and talk about this and fix it,
Awesome. Thanks, Mom. And I think that's a good place to end. We will wrap it up with that and come back with part 2 here in just a few days. And so until then, thank you guys for being here, and we'll talk to you in a bit.
You've been listening to the Catholic Family Podcast. If you enjoyed this show, please share it with your friends and family. You can support the production on Patreon and PayPal, and you can reach Kevin at kevin89davis@gmail.com. Ad Maiorem Dei Gloriam, all for the greater glory of God.